This is a $2,000 studio vocal microphone. This is a $140 USB microphone. If you can't hear the difference, neither can your audience. So let me tell you everything you need to know about using one of these. USB microphones are actually really cool because in order to use a microphone, you usually need two things. You need the microphone, and then it has to plug into something called an audio interface. You can see it plugs into the XLR jack right there. And the interface is kind of the powerhouse. It does a couple different things. It boosts the microphone using something called a preamp. It does all the processing, so you can choose how loud is the microphone when you're listening to it. Do you add EQ? And then it also converts it into digital, so you can send it right to your computer over USB. And if you were to take both the microphone and the interface and combine them together, you have a USB microphone. It's kind of a two-in-one machine. And the goal of these USB microphones is to take something as complicated as this whole setup right here and make it simple enough that anybody can plug one into their computer and just use it. And some of these microphones do that really well. So let's plug this thing in. I'm gonna show you how to set it up. I'm gonna show you things you can do to make it sound better. And then I'm gonna give you some suggestions and things to think about when picking your own microphone at the end of the video. I was about to say, let's plug this thing in, but it looks like I already did. So let's get started. The very first thing we're gonna do in OBS is we're gonna go to our audio mixer over here. We're gonna see our microphone input. We're gonna hit these three little dots, go to properties, and then we're gonna make sure the device says mic in on the Elgato Wave 3. You can see there are a couple other options for Wave 3. We're gonna get to that later. So click mic in, hit OK, and now you can see this little meter right here showing us exactly what this microphone is hearing. Let's double check that real quick by tapping on the microphone. Yep, you can see it's definitely this microphone that's being picked up. And now that we have a microphone sending a signal to OBS, the next thing we need to do is make sure our levels are set, or volume of our microphone, essentially. Some microphones allow you to do it on the microphone, like the Elgato Wave 3 here, for example. You can see I can do it with the dial on the front, but if it comes with software that allows you to do it in there, you're gonna get a little bit more control. So let's jump into that real quick. We're gonna open the Elgato Wavelink software. Here we can see our Elgato Wave 3, and if I click the down arrow, we can see our input gain. The gain is the microphone level itself. And so as we're talking, let's make sure we set it exactly where we're gonna have it on our desk. I usually suggest having it a little bit closer to your mouth like this. And as I talk, you can see it goes right up into the yellow, which is generally where we want it to be. I can turn it down, I can turn it up, but I think that was a pretty good spot, right around 28 dB there. Maybe 30. Check, 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 check. I'm gonna bring it down just in case we yell during a game a little bit. Let's give it that little bit of headroom. The basic setup is done. Now, something you should know, if you start streaming and you notice that your voice is way louder than your game, one thing you don't wanna do is go back into the microphone here and turn down the gain of the microphone. Where you should change the microphone volume is the same place that you're mixing the levels of all your different sources. So if you're mixing right in OBS itself, maybe you have your gain volume down here, you'll just wanna drag this down a little bit like that. Or if you're using Elgato's mixing software and have your system going through right here, you'll want to turn it down right inside here. Now, just so you know, this whole mixing software is something I'll be doing in a future video. So if you want to see how to mix your audio like that, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And while you're down there, hit the like button because it's free and it helps out a lot and it pleases the algorithm gods of YouTube. One of the quick tips I always do when I'm setting up a brand new microphone and I want to see if my voice and the game volume are just perfect, I'll set up a private stream on Twitch or even just stream to a secret account and I'll watch it and I'll play the loud moments of the game while I'm talking and then I'll watch the stream and make sure it lines up just right. You can also record yourself in OBS and do the same thing, but that's something I'd recommend. Now let's talk about how to make the microphone sound even better. I've got 5 main tips for you. Let's jump into that. The very first thing you should do is something we already did, and it's make sure that your input level is correct. If you're streaming and you notice your voice is crackling a little bit or starting to sound a little bit like an old-timey radio, this is peaking. The sound you're hearing right now is peaking. It means your gain is probably too high. Bring it down a couple decibels. That'll usually solve that problem. Nobody wants to sound like XQC. The next 2 things you can do are gonna be hardware improvements. This first one you can see I've got on here is called a shock mount. It's kind of like this rubber band looking apparatus that springs the microphone around so it can wiggle. What that does is it basically means the microphone is floating in the air. So if you bump your desk or you pick up your mouse a little bit and move it around and hit the desk, any vibrations in your desk don't travel into the microphone as well. The second hardware thing you can add is something called a pop filter, something like this. And that's just a little bit of an air filter that goes in front of your microphone, and it stops the plosives, like your P's and your T's, things that have just gusts of wind hitting your microphone. It stops that from happening. P's and T's, P's and T's, P's and T's and P's and T's. The last two things I'd recommend everybody do to their microphone to make it sound better are done in the software, and they're called plugins. The first one is called EQ, and the second one is called compression. EQ is short for equalizer, and it lets you boost the frequencies in your voice that you want to hear and cut some of the frequencies that you don't like so much. You can see I've got an equalizer open right here on my screen, and if I boost up the highs just by a couple decibels here, maybe 2 decibels, that'll make my voice sound a little bit brighter. If I cut some of the mids over here around 500 hertz, that'll get rid of some of the muddiness in my voice. And then if I boost the low frequencies just by a couple decibels, that'll give me some thickness. It'll make my voice sound a little bit deeper and richer. This in the audio industry is called the California smile, just boosting the highs and the lows a little bit and scooping out a little bit of the mids. A compressor is something that keeps your voice a little bit more consistent by making the loud parts of your voice quieter and the quiet parts of your voice louder. This can be set up in 2 minutes. I've got a whole video on that as well. I'll put that in the corner for anyone who wants to set up compression on their voice. So, which microphone should you go out and look for? Well, let me give you a couple things to think about when you're deciding on a microphone. First one, probably the most important one. Do you want a dynamic microphone or do you want a condenser microphone? These are the two most common types of microphones. Condenser mics are usually front-facing like this, where you talk into the side, whereas you can usually tell when one's a dynamic microphone because you talk into the top, like this, or like the SM7B. And they're both good at 2 different things. Condenser mics are generally a lot more sensitive, so you get a lot more detail. They're usually used when tracking vocals for music. The problem when using them for streaming is they also tend to pick up things like keyboards and mics really easily. So if you're gaming, I think dynamic mics might be the way to go, because dynamic mics are typically more only sensitive to what's right in front of them. It doesn't mean you can't hear the mouse and keyboard at all, it just means it's a little bit better. So if you're doing more music streams or just chatting, stuff that really isolates your voice and you're not making a lot of extra sounds, maybe a condenser mic is the way to go. Thing number 2 you should consider when picking a microphone is what features are involved on them. This is what we'll get into a little bit more in that next video when I talk about mixing features and stuff on the microphone, because as I mentioned, this has the entire audio interface built into it, and some of them have more powerful audio interfaces than others. Do you need mixing software that goes into it? What dials and buttons do you want on the microphone itself? These are all different on each microphone. Something for you to consider. And the last one is make sure the microphone sounds good. Watch some YouTube videos. Make sure you watch some unsponsored ones. Watch 2 or 3 before you make a purchase to make sure it sounds good. We got a handful of microphone reviews on this channel if you want to check them out. But other than that, I think you guys are pretty much ready to pick up a USB microphone. I'm going to get started on the next video where we talk about the mixing software and some of the features built into these. So make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. And guys, as always, happy streaming.